Thomas Forrester's return does not arrive quietly. It never could. Even before he steps fully back into the halls of Forrester Creations, his presence is already felt, like a pressure change in the air that unsettles old certainties and awakens instincts long believed to be buried. For Thomas, coming back is not simply about reclaiming a job or restoring a reputation. It is about reclaiming authorship over his own life, a chance to stand at the center of decisions rather than exist as an extension of someone else's will. Yet the cruel irony of his return is that the very place he seeks autonomy is the same place where his identity has always been most compromised. Working near hope again is not a complication Thomas anticipates, so much as one he cannot avoid. Their shared history lingers in the architecture of every room they enter, in the way familiarity settles too easily between them, bypassing caution. The spark that once defined them does not announce itself with dramatic gestures or forbidden glances. It exists in subtler forms now, in timing, in intuition, in the way conversations flow without friction. Thomas does not come back seeking romance, at least not consciously. What he seeks is legitimacy. Respect. The right to be seen as more than a means to an end. Hope understands this almost immediately. She has always understood Thomas in ways others either cannot or refuse to. But her understanding has evolved. She no longer needs to seduce, persuade, or promise anything explicitly. That would be too obvious, too reckless, too easy to dismiss. Instead, she offers something far more dangerous. A vision of a future where Thomas is not defined by Ridge's expectations, where his talent is not filtered through paternal approval, where his choices matter, because they are his own. Hope does not frame this vision as rebellion. She frames it as alignment. She speaks, not in declarations, but in possibilities. In conversations that linger just long enough to plant ideas without forcing conclusions. She allows Thomas to imagine himself standing in rooms where his voice is not overridden, where his creative instincts are trusted rather than managed. And in doing so, she touches the deepest wound he carries, the belief that no matter how gifted he is, he will always be perceived as an extension of his father rather than an independent force. This is the quiet power of Hope's influence. She does not challenge Ridge directly. She does not need to. All she has to do is offer Thomas an alternative lens through which to see himself. A lens where love and respect are not mutually exclusive. Where admiration is not conditional. Where he is not asked to choose between being valued and being controlled. As Thomas reintegrates into Forrester Creations, the old patterns attempt to reassert themselves. Ridge's presence looms, authoritative and familiar, reminding Thomas of the hierarchy he has spent his life navigating. Every design review, every strategic discussion carries an undercurrent of expectation. Thomas is welcomed back, but not without conditions. His autonomy is implied rather than granted, contingent upon compliance rather than trust. This dynamic does not explode into open conflict. It simmers, reinforcing Thomas's growing awareness that his role, however prestigious, remains fundamentally constrained. It is in this context that Katie's offer of collaboration enters the picture. On the surface, it is a business opportunity, strategic, well-timed, and mutually beneficial. Katie's emerging influence represents a new axis of power in the fashion world, one that is not rooted in Forrester legacy or Spencer dominance alone, but in calculated independence. For Thomas, the offer feels like a door opening where there was once only a wall. It is not merely an escape from Ridge's shadow. It is a chance to redefine success on his own terms. Hope recognizes the significance of this moment instantly. She understands that Thomas is standing at a crossroads, even if he does not fully articulate it yet. The choice before him is not between companies or alliances, but between identities. One path leads back to familiar validation, approval earned through obedience, respect granted through alignment with Ridge's vision. The other path leads toward uncertainty, risk, and the promise of self-determination. Hope's role in this moment is not to push, but to frame. She transforms Katie's offer from a transaction into an invitation. An invitation to be fully seen, fully valued, fully chosen. She does not tell Thomas what to do. She shows him who he could become if he chooses differently. In her presence, the future does not feel like a threat, it feels like liberation. For Thomas, this realization is intoxicating. Not because it promises romance, but because it promises dignity. The idea that he could be loved without being managed, respected without being controlled, resonates more deeply than he is prepared to admit. For years, his relationship with Ridge has been defined by a paradox: unconditional love paired with conditional trust. Thomas has learned to accept this dynamic as normal, even necessary. But Hope's vision disrupts that normalization. It suggests that loyalty does not have to mean submission. As the possibility of partnership with Katie becomes more tangible, Thomas begins to reassess everything he has taken for granted. He notices how often Ridge speaks for him rather than with him. How frequently his ideas are reframed as extensions of a larger plan rather than innovations in their own right. These observations do not provoke immediate anger. Instead, they foster a quiet resolve. A determination to step out of a role he did not consciously choose, but has nonetheless inhabited for most of his adult life. When Thomas ultimately agrees to support Katie, the decision is layered with meaning. On the surface, it is a strategic move, justified by creative opportunity and professional growth. Beneath that justification lies something far more personal. Supporting Katie represents a symbolic break from Ridge's control. It is a declaration, made not through confrontation, but through action, that Thomas will no longer define himself solely through his father's approval. Hope understands the weight of this choice better than anyone. She knows that Thomas's decision is not just about business alignment, it is about emotional emancipation. And while she does not demand acknowledgement, she is acutely aware of the role she has played in guiding him toward this moment. There is a dangerous intimacy in that awareness, one that neither of them fully confronts. The connection between them is no longer rooted in unresolved desire, but in shared defiance against a system that has limited them both. For Ridge, the shift does not go unnoticed. He senses the change in Thomas's posture, in the way he speaks, in the confidence that no longer seeks immediate validation. This realization triggers its own internal conflict. Ridge is forced to confront the possibility that his guidance, once protective, has become restrictive. That his attempts to shape Thomas's path may have inadvertently driven him away. Yet acknowledging this would require Ridge to relinquish control, something he has never done easily. The tension between father and son remains unspoken, but it permeates every interaction. Thomas does not accuse. Ridge does not apologize. Instead, they navigate around each other, each aware that the balance has shifted. Thomas is no longer simply returning, he is redefining his position. As the new alliances solidify, the emotional stakes intensify. Hope watches from a distance that feels both intentional and precarious. She knows that the future she has helped Thomas envision carries risks, not just professionally, but emotionally. The closer he moves toward independence, the more unstable his connections become. And in that instability lies both opportunity and danger. The brilliance of this unfolding storyline is its restraint. No one declares war. No one claims betrayal outright. The conflict is psychological, structural, and deeply personal. Thomas's choice to support Katie is not framed as defiance, but as evolution. Hope's influence is not overt manipulation, but subtle empowerment. Ridge's loss of control is not sudden, but incremental. In this quiet escalation, the past and future collide. Old sparks do not ignite through passion, but through purpose. And the most dangerous aspect of all is that every choice made feels justified, even necessary. Thomas believes he is finally standing on the right side, not just of business, but of himself. And yet, as the dust begins to settle, one question remains unanswered. Can liberation achieved through alignment with someone else ever truly be independence? Or is Thomas simply trading one form of control for another, wrapped this time in the language of respect and possibility? The answer, as always in this world, will not come easily. But one thing is certain, Thomas's return has set forces in motion that cannot be reversed. The ties that once bound him to Ridge are fraying, not through rebellion, but through choice. And in that choice lies the promise of transformation, or the seed of an even deeper reckoning still to come. Thomas's decision lands like a slap not because it is loud, but because it is undeniable. For Ridge, it is not simply a professional setback, or a strategic loss. It is an existential insult, one that strikes at the core of how he understands authority, loyalty, and the unspoken rules that have governed his world for decades. Ridge has always believed that power, once established, sustains itself through proximity and precedent. Thomas's choice shatters that belief. It announces, without words, that proximity is no longer enough and precedent no longer binding. What wounds Ridge most deeply is not that he has lost a valuable asset. It is that he recognizes, with sudden clarity, that the game is no longer being played on the field he built. The rules he assumed were immutable are being rewritten, not through rebellion or confrontation, but through quiet consensus formed elsewhere. Hope and Katie are not challenging him head-on. They are simply moving forward without him, redefining family and loyalty in ways that do not require his approval. To Ridge, this feels like erasure. Anger follows swiftly, but it is not precise. Ridge does not pause long enough to identify its true source. He tells himself he is furious at Thomas for disloyalty, at Katie for opportunism, at Hope for manipulation. Yet beneath those accusations lies a deeper fear he cannot yet articulate, the fear that his influence has limits, and that those limits are now visible to everyone. That fear transforms into urgency, and urgency into reaction. Ridge strikes out, not strategically, but emotionally, mistaking volume for authority and exposure for strength. His first mistake is direction. He aims his anger at the wrong people, in the wrong order, for the wrong reasons. Instead of confronting the structural shift taking place around him, he focuses on individuals who feel safest to confront. He lashes out publicly, allowing his frustration to spill into spaces that once relied on his restraint. The composure that once defined him fractures under pressure, revealing a volatility that unsettles even those who have long stood by his side. His second mistake is timing. Ridge reacts before the dust has settled, before alliances have fully formed, before motives have hardened. In doing so, he exposes his vulnerability at the exact moment others are assessing the landscape. People who might have remained neutral now see a man unraveling rather than leading. Conversations begin to change tone. Support becomes cautious. Silence replaces affirmation. The third mistake, and perhaps the most damaging, is visibility. Ridge's anger is no longer contained. It becomes performative, impossible to ignore. He speaks too loudly, pushes too hard, insists too often. The very traits that once established his authority now feel oppressive. Those who are not directly involved begin to feel the weight of his presence as something suffocating rather than stabilizing. What was once leadership now resembles control. This shift does not go unnoticed. In fact, it accelerates the very outcome Ridge fears most. People who had no intention of opposing him begin to reconsider their positions, not because they are loyal to Katie, not because they believe Hope's vision is flawless, but because they are alarmed. Ridge's behavior signals instability, and instability is dangerous in a world built on perception and trust. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, a countercurrent forms. This emerging alliance is not ideological. It is pragmatic. Those drawn into it do not necessarily agree with each other, nor do they share a singular vision for the future. What unites them is concern. They sense that Ridge, once the anchor of their professional and emotional ecosystem, is becoming unpredictable. His reactions feel disproportionate. His need for control feels urgent. An urgency, unchecked, threatens everyone. For Ridge, this realization comes too late. By the time he senses resistance, it has already solidified into quiet resolve. Meetings feel colder. Feedback becomes guarded. Doors that once opened easily now require negotiation. He interprets this as betrayal, further fueling his anger, further justifying his belief that he is being undermined. The cycle tightens. Each reaction reinforces the next, creating a feedback loop that isolates him more with every attempt to reassert dominance. What Ridge fails to see is that his opponents are not driven by affection for Katie or allegiance to Hope. They are driven by self-preservation. They fear that Ridge's escalating behavior will destabilize the structures they rely on. They fear that his refusal to adapt will provoke consequences no one can control. In this sense, the alliance against him is not born of rebellion, but of caution. Hope watches this unfold with a mixture of resolve and unease. She understands that Ridge's anger is not personal, even when it feels directed at her. It is existential. He is fighting the erosion of a world that once centered him. Katie, too, recognizes the pattern. She has lived long enough in Ridge's orbit to know that his anger is a response to perceived loss of relevance rather than moral outrage. Neither woman seeks to humiliate him. They simply refuse to retreat. Thomas stands at the center of this storm, acutely aware of the consequences of his choice. He did not anticipate the scale of Ridge's reaction, but he cannot deny its meaning. His decision has forced his father to confront a reality he long avoided, that authority without consent is fragile. Thomas feels guilt, but not regret. For the first time, he understands that his autonomy carries weight, not only for himself, but for the entire system that has depended on his compliance. As Ridge's behavior grows more erratic, those who once defended him begin to withdraw quietly. Not out of spite, but out of fear. Fear that his anger will provoke irreversible damage. Fear that his insistence on control will fracture relationships beyond repair. Fear that he no longer knows how to lead without dominating. This is how the alliance truly forms, not in secret meetings or dramatic declarations, but in shared glances, in cautious conversations, in the collective decision to create distance. Ridge becomes the common denominator of unease. The problem no one wants to name aloud, but everyone feels compelled to address. The tragedy is that Ridge does not see himself as the antagonist of this moment. He believes he is defending family, legacy, order. He believes that if he pushes hard enough, the world will snap back into place. What he cannot accept is that the world has already moved on, not in defiance, but in evolution. And evolution does not negotiate with nostalgia. By the time Ridge realizes that the opposition he faces is not fueled by love for Katie but fear of him, the damage is already underway. His authority, once unquestioned, is now conditional. His presence, once reassuring, now provokes tension. The system he helped build is adapting around him, not because it hates him, but because it no longer trusts him to adapt himself. In this moment, Ridge stands at a crossroads he never expected to face. He can continue down this path, tightening his grip until nothing remains within it. Or he can confront the truth he has avoided, that leadership requires change, and change requires humility. Whether he chooses evolution or collapse remains uncertain. But one thing is clear. The rules have already been rewritten, and the game is no longer his alone to control.